Hey, I'm JD. Welcome to my channel. We're assembling an Elgin watch movement today, and I've got it coming out of the cleaning baskets. It was a good cleaning, I should say. I put it in there for quite a while to get this thing spanky clean. These are the little mini baskets you put the small parts in. So you got to make sure you organize the parts so they don't hit each other, so the bigger parts are not smashing into the smaller parts. So that's how you organize it, and then put the baskets back. And I do recommend having at least 4 mini baskets to accomplish this. And so I'm just taking the parts out. Sometimes I'll just dump them onto the mat and that's it. And there we get the mainspring there and some of the plates on this movement. It's a beautiful old Elgin watch movement. There we go. That's a view from the side of all the things, the parts coming out, and there's the mainspring barrel, and I've got the lid. I usually wear one glove so I can have the dexterity with the other hand, and I don't have to worry about that. And I'm just organizing the baskets. They tend to want to just jump around with their own personality. Put it all back into a cardboard box, and I do that just in case for some reason I get hit. This box will make sure the parts don't get lost. So here I've got the movement here, the main plate, and I've got to get this thing set up for reassembly, but I'm going to do the jewels first. So I'm taking out the screws and using Rodico to actually take these very small screws out and put them on my mat. And I organize them left and right so they go back in the exact same way. And I score the jewel setting with the plate, so I know that the jewel setting will go in the same way. So I'm taking off the jewel here. I'm just punching it out with a piece of pegwood. I've got to sharpen the pegwood up on the end because it's just too wide for the hole. There's my knife. So I sharpen that up on the end, and allows me to take that pegwood and just push right down on the mat. There's enough give on the mat that that thing will come right out. So, and there it is. There's the jewel all ready. So here I'm putting the 2 jewels into a copper cap and filling it with lighter fluid, and I use a brush, and this allows me to clean the jewels quite well so they're ready to be installed, dried off and installed, but it allows me to just get at those jewels and clean them by hand. You don't want to put those jewels into the cleaning machine because they could get lost, or the wires could be too wide and the jewel will slip through. So I'd use the watch paper. It comes in sheets of I think 1,000, and you can get that on eBay. Probably the best place to look for it. And it just sucks up the leftover lighter fluid, and that lighter fluid just completely dries up right away and naturally. So I can put the jewel back, and this is the actual hole jewel, or jewel hole. And then I check the depth on the other side to make sure it's back properly. Put a little bit of oil in there. And normally I oil the cap and then bring it around, but it's just as good in this case to oil the jewel itself and bring it around. So I put the cap jewel on, and it's aligned perfectly because I scored the jewel and the plate to make sure that that jewel went in perfectly. And now I take the screws and put them back in the same order they came out. And so that is the lower jewel for the watch balance. So that's the lower jewel for the watch balance, which is critical for the actual operation of the watch. So there we go. That's done. Clean off my oiling stick with some, what is that stuff? Big chunk of wood. Now I'm just making sure I oil the very pertinent parts of the watch here while I've got the movement apart, and I can get at it well and not worry about trying to oil it after I've assembled it. So mount it up on the Myers number 58 movement holder, and also do a little bit of oiling on the barrel and other areas of the watch before I continue. Alrighty, what's next in this wonderful project? Well, I'm going to clean off the pallet fork, and that's another thing I do manually using lighter fluid, and dry that off as well, and just gets off any oils that are on the jewels of the pallet fork. And the lighter fluid will not dissolve any of the shellac, which is a wonderful thing. So that's the pallet fork done and ready. And now I've got the barrel. I've actually wound the spring into the barrel, back into the barrel. I didn't bother showing that as it's not, well, didn't need to show that. So trying to put the arbor in is fun sometimes. You got to make sure that the arbor is in the right direction and that the hook goes into the opening on the mainspring and you fit it in there. I can't do that job with gloves alone, so I do have long fingernails on my guitar hand, and I use that to help me pinch that arbor into that hole. It's a tough job. And after I've got that mainspring put in place, I usually oil it. So I'm using a bit of a pin vise here to grab that arbor and allow me to manipulate it. And then once I've got the arbor in there manipulated, I oil it. So I'm going to oil the spring and oil the arbor as well. Well, here we go again. I'm farting around with the arbor even more. Mainspring work can be a bit of a pain, and just when you think you got it done, you're screwed. So I put the oil in 4 parts of the mainspring on the top. This is an old mainspring, so it does require oil. Put the cap on, and there's a lip in this particular cap, or an opening, that interfaces with an edge on the mainspring that's intended to keep that mainspring in place. So it's a notch or an edge, an outward edge, and I'm trying to line that up properly. This was a tough job because that notch was not aligned properly to square cutout on the cap, and so I had to play with it a bit to get that thing lined up properly, and I eventually did it, but it was a bit of a pain. I'll tell you that right now. So once I did that, I pressed the cap on and use a pair of tweezers and the wide part of the tweezers to press down on the cap. Put that back in the barrel, and then I spin it, and it's spinning very nicely. So you want to make sure there's freedom in there. And the next part of the watch reassembly is the pallet fork. It's got a cock here that you put over the fork with 1 screw that keeps that in place. So the tricky part here is to make sure that you're very careful and that the pivot is going through the hole in the jewel on the top, and that you don't want to crush that upper pivot on the pallet fork. So you make sure that's completely aligned before you tighten anything, and you keep testing that pallet fork as you're tightening to make sure it's not squeezing down on it. And then I put a drop of 90-10 oil on the top of that just to lubricate it. It's meant to lubricate. The jewel has got an area, like a bath area, to lubricate that jewel, so you might as well lubricate it. Now I'm using that oil that's used, it's like a gel that's used to help that pallet fork work with the escapement wheel. Very nice gel. Alright, the next job here is to reassemble the various components. So I've got the escape wheel here that I'm putting in. This was a bit trickier this time than normal because I had a hard time aligning the plates on this one for some reason. So I get the escape wheel in position, no problem. And then I've got to put in the next wheel, which is the 4th wheel, which has got the pivot going down through that the second hand rides on. So that's the 4th wheel. Then the 3rd wheel I call the intermediate wheel, and that goes in there, and that's no problem. And then the center wheel goes in over the fork. So I took time to go eat dinner, I think, and came back. So there's the plate I had fun with. So usually I put the plate over and I put 2 screws in loosely, and then I try to align it up properly, and this wasn't working for me, so I ended up taking the screws back out and doing the alignment. And in this case, you got to hold it up to your eye sometimes and look at where those pivots are to make sure they're in the right position. It was a bit tougher than normal on this watch for some reason, but over time I was able to do it. I've got this little pokey device I use, as you just saw, and I got that at a hobby shop. So I've got a black mark on my finger, and I don't know how it got there. So here I'm screwing it down. I've finally got the pivots lined up properly, and everything's in place. Again, I tighten the screws very lightly, so I don't really tighten them until I get the whole watch together, and make sure it's kind of functioning before I tighten anything. And here I'm putting the second setting mechanisms in here and making sure they're oiled properly. I oiled them when they're sitting in place usually to make sure that I know where the oil is going, and I just use I use a medium oil to oil those. So, and then I've got more parts of the setting mechanism. Sometimes I will not completely disassemble the setting mechanism. I will make sure it's completely dry and then oil the pertinent parts of the setting mechanism. There's a chance you could break a spring on these vintage watches, and then trying to find another replacement spring may be impossible. So I often don't disassemble some of the springs that I see in there, as they really don't need to be disassembled. And I've discussed this with other watchmakers, and they do the same thing. So here I'm putting the center wheel over the mainspring barrel, and that looked like a good idea initially. So I got that all together, and I'm poking away again, trying to make sure the actual pivots are showing through. This is a tough part when the watch just decides to not work properly. so I'm doing that and getting it all organized, poke, and trying to make sure everything is fine. And I think reassembling the plates this time was the hardest job. I'm not sure why, but it was on this watch. This was causing me all kinds of pain this time that I don't normally have. And I eventually get it in place and lined up and assembled, and then I have to put on the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel after. So I just putting the screws back in lightly, making sure everything is down when I put the screws back in so the pivots don't jump back up on me, because that can be a pain. So I put them in, but I don't tighten them all the way. I just tighten them very lightly until I make sure that the pocket watch actually works. And then I can, after I've tested it, make sure it works, and I can put the pivots or put the screws in to the proper direction. So this wheel here is often righty loosey instead of righty tighty. So you got to check the screw direction on that. It's usually the opposite, and it's only the opposite because of the pressure of the ratchet wheel on that wheel, and you don't want the screw to unscrew. So there we go. And I'm testing right now the pallet fork, just flicking it a bit, put a little power on the watch so the mainspring is holding nicely here, and then I just flick that pallet fork back and forth, and now I know it's working well. And I'm just going to oil these jewels while I got everything out, and that's a necessity to properly oil the watch, but don't over oil it. And here we've got a little bit too much oil on there, and I just remove it with Rodico. So clean that up a bit with Rodico. Now I flip the watch over. This is where the face goes, and I've got to put this plate over the face, or over the minute wheel, and put the screws in. The screws are very shallow, so I'm paying attention so I don't actually nick the screw and make it fly off onto the carpet and have to screw hunt for a while. This is what I used to do years ago when I started watchmaking. I spent half my time on the carpet looking for parts, as all you watchmakers have done in the past. So I was able to tighten that well. I put the cannon pinion back and just line it up properly with the teeth and push down. So that's no issue at all. And I've got the 5395 pad there, which is a gel-filled pad, which will protect your watch from any pressure that you would put on if it's not on the gel push pad. Now that I've got the watch completely open, make sure I oil the pivots or the jewels on the other side so that they're well oiled, and and the watch will run for a long time. Now I'm testing the actual mechanism for winding and setting. So this is a setting mechanism. Make sure the springs are all working properly so I can continue with the exercise. I'm oiling as well, putting a thicker oil on the setting mechanisms. Make sure they're well oiled as well. Not too much so it doesn't find its way in other places of the watch. And now I just want to clean this is my dunker tank, my own invention. And I'm able to actually clean the hairspring with lighter fluid. I find this works really well as opposed to disassembling the hairspring at this time in the actual assembly. So clean the hairspring with lighter fluid. I also got rid of the caps and the upper jewel and oiled that properly before. Didn't show you that. It's meticulous. And now I'm trying to get this watch in, and I move the pallet fork over to the right position so it can accept the impulse jewel, and I did that wrong that time, and so now I decided to do it the other way, spin it around and see if I can get this old watch working. And there it is. Looks like it's running fine. And the watch is running well. I'm just going to use my Bergeron stick to keep the balance cock down while I put the screw back in, so the balance for some reason doesn't jump up, because when you're screwing it in, that sometimes may jar the balance cock and cause the balance to jump up, which would cause the impulse jewel perhaps to jump out of the mouth of the pallet fork. So you don't want that. So now I know it's in there well, so I'm able to screw that down nice and tightly. So that's it. Thanks for watching this assembly of this old pocket watch, and stay tuned for more in the future.